Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming out today. My name is Ed Cable. I'm the President CEO of the Mifos Initiative. And last year, my colleague James and we gave a talk on fueling enterprise innovation on top of open source core banking. So this talk is going to build nicely upon that. And it's going to look at several powerful enabling technologies and trends that are helping to democratize financial services. And so I want to further explore the multiplier effect that open source core banking can have on these democratizing forces, and then how you can practically apply them as either a developer or a fintech company. So this is just a brief rundown of what I want to cover today. First off, I want to define what I mean by democratizing financial services and why it really matters. Then I want to explore a little bit about who Mifos is and what we do. And then we're going to look at the challenges to democratizing financial services and how open source banking can help address them. And then the main gist of the talk is going to focus on looking at each of these democratizing forces and how open source core banking can have a multiplying effect on them. And then lastly, we'll close with some takeaways and how you can take action. So first off, I just want to establish what the definition of democratizing financial services is. So Merriam-Webster's defines democratize to make something available to all. And in this case, we're talking about financial services. And so we couldn't talk about democratizing financial services today without talking about financial inclusion, which involves providing access to the basic financial services that you and I take for granted, like a safe place to save your money, access to credit, or being able to mitigate risks through insurance. And despite the awesome strides that have been made with more than 1 billion moving out of extreme poverty in the last 25 years, and more than 515 million being financially included since 2014, there are still 3 billion that are underbanked. And that's a massive number, and it's something I'm going to, of course, return to later on throughout this presentation. But first off, I want to just identify that it's not just these frontier markets that we still need to democratize financial services. Even in developed markets like the US or Canada, there still are payday lenders with usurious practices charging exorbitant interest rates, and there are underrepresented groups like First Nations peoples that are still not properly served by the banking sector. And that also impacts you and me and the everyday financial services that we use. Banking and how we interact with our money shouldn't be controlled by a few banks. You can take case in point the example with Wells Fargo and the millions of fake accounts that they created. And it's also been great to see the payments innovation led by mega platform companies like Facebook, Google, Alipay, and Amazon. But once again, we can't have too much control over our data and our finances in the hands of a few players. So our vision is not just about access, but about choice and innovation, and there should be a level playing field and enabling technologies to allow banks, mega platforms, credit unions, microfinance institutions, and fintechs all to compete equally in offering you and me innovative financial services that positively impact our lives. So while there are still 3 billion to reach at the base of the pyramid, for us, we see that as only the tip of the pyramid, and what we're doing around open source core banking can impact the global financial sector at large, and now I'm going to show you how. So before we take a closer look at each of these democratizing forces, I first want to talk about who Mifos is and how open source banking can accelerate them. And so I'm going to share with you our financial inclusion journey because it's important to establish who we are and what we do, but also to establish how we have been experts in democratizing financial services through open source technology-enabled financial inclusion. First off, I just want to establish how important and fundamental openness is to our community, our culture, and our project. So it's not just about open source technology, but it's about openness of business models across our ecosystem to help scale sustainable new innovations. It's about having an open community where technologists, developers, and practitioners can come together and share new ideas. And it's also about establishing open standards for innovation and also just having widespread open collaboration with no barriers. So from microfinance institutions serving hundreds to fintech companies reaching millions, collectively more than 350 organizations that use either Mifos or solutions powered by our open APIs are reaching more than 11 million clients worldwide. So since its roots with Muhammad Yunus at the Green Bank in Bangladesh, the financial services to the poor market has continually been evolving from microfinance to financial inclusion and now to digital financial services. In Mifos, we've been there at each stage of this evolution, continuing to provide pioneering technologies to help the industry grow. So we were the world's first web-based MIS for microfinance. We were the world's first API-driven core banking platform for financial inclusion. And now we're launching a cloud-native application framework for digital financial services. And so first off, before we look at these democratizing forces, I want to take one closer look at what we really believe open source core banking from the ground up looks like. And so this is how we see the future, and we're now trying to make it a reality as this next generation cloud-native architecture is actively under development across our community. So right now, open APIs are being enabled across banks and other fintechs to provide open access to data, but the core banking system itself is still not open. And so we're deconstructing the core banking system into a set of componentized individual microservices that you can build and compose as a set of like Lego building blocks for financial services. And we ultimately believe that core banking should become commoditized software because the real value lies in the data that flows in and out of the platform and the solutions and applications that are built on top. And so while the initial core use cases for Mifos X were as a back office system for traditional brick and mortar financial institutions, over the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of fintech companies who have rolled out digital credit and mobile wallet solutions on top of the core banking platform and our open APIs. And before we take a deep dive into the democratizing forces, just want to establish what some of those barriers to democratizing financial services have been. On the technology front, costly license fees, outdated legacy architecture, outdated payment systems, and costly and difficult systems to maintain have made innovation costly, slow, and stifled it. And so even as we've talked with some of our prospective customers, we've seen that some of their developers are actually dying out, literally, trying to support the outdated mainframe technologies and languages that their systems are currently built on. And many banks are stuck in their status quo, and they have no incentive to innovate. And we really need to enable co-opetition around shared assets and enable a level playing field such that fintechs and other companies can compete with the banks. We fully believe that open source core banking can help the entire sector address these challenges. So our friends at the Gates Foundation have a really useful framework for looking at financial services innovation. They call this the rules, Rayll, accounts, apps framework. So first off, you need a set of enabling rules in place to help guide and keep the industry secure. And you also need rails in place to enable the smooth flow of transactions, data, money, trust, identity. And you also need an account management layer to maintain the balance of the account and allow apps and innovations to be built on top of those accounts. So each one of these democratizing forces we're going to look at today are mutually independent, but also mutually reinforcing of each other. So we're going to first look at cloud. We're going to look at mobile and mobile financial services. We're going to look at national digital identity, artificial intelligence and big data, open banking, as well as the blockchain. And so for each of these, I'm going to give a brief primer on them, establish them in a global context, and then look at real-world examples from our ecosystem at how open source core banking is being applied to amplify their impact. So you can really see how powerful open source core banking can become once you look at these forces in the context of rules, rails, accounts, and apps. And so each of these underlying forces falls in the category of being either an enabling rule or a rail. And this is why the account layer is so critical, because it's that point of connection between building an innovative product service that leverages those rails or is guided by those rules. It's the vessel that carries it all through to the end customer. And this vessel doesn't need to be complicated or complex, but it needs to be simple, open, connected, flexible, and extensible. And that's why we believe you can make this layer commoditized infrastructure and the real value then lies in those apps and innovation that get built on top of the account layer. So you need to be able to pull out data from the core banking system to train your AI models. You need to integrate with a digital identity system if that's in place. You need to be able to seamlessly facilitate transactions on top of a set of digital rails. You need to be able to publish an open API if you have one, and then you need that data to flow in and out effectively. But by not having to build or buy an expensive core banking system, you can free up fintechs to focus on the customer experience and the user-facing innovation that's critical. And most importantly, by having a modern API-based architecture, you can leverage these democratizing forces and deliver new services on top of them. So now let's start to take a closer look at each of these forces. The first one we're going to look at is the cloud. So according to a number of different McKinsey reports, on the public cloud is projected to grow by more than 17% to $206 billion in 2019. And cloud spending is going to grow at 6 times the rate of the general IT spending through 2020. And looking at cloud adoption in the financial services sector, that's the most mature sector right now, reaching an adoption level of 100% across volume of server images compared to a median rate of 20%. But despite this level of maturity in the financial services sector, they're still really beginning just to scratch the surface of the cloud. Most of the effort is just shifting over workloads that come from data centers into the cloud and not leveraging cloud-native architectures yet, not leveraging the cloud for artificial intelligence and machine learning, and not using it to process the massive amounts of data that can now be collected through mobile phones, through open banking. And I want to look more closely at the cloud journey that we've been on, because we've learned a lot and we continue to evolve, and it set the stage for the partner that I'm going to highlight as an example of a cloud member of our ecosystem. So in 2010, we launched Mifos Cloud in India, and it was very well thought out, but we failed and faced a lot of challenge in trying to implement it. First off, at that time, cloud computing wasn't as mainstream as it is now. The affordability of AWS and robustness wasn't as it is now. Our customers weren't ready for the cloud, and most importantly, our software wasn't architected with a multi-tenant architecture to support it. But luckily from this failure, 2 key discoveries emerged. First off, we spun Mifos out as a separate initiative and rewrote the software completely from scratch to be API-based and to be multi-tenant to enable partners to deliver cloud solutions. And then secondly, Finflux, our gold partner, who I'm going to highlight in a few slides, took on the role of hosting our initial cloud customers from India. And so with our Generation 2 architecture, you can see how our open source core banking APIs have powered the solutions on the screen. So companies worldwide have built out their own branded cloud-based core banking solutions that are now reaching millions and delivered at scale. So one of these companies I want to focus on is Finflux. They're a partner of ours based out of Bangalore, India. And so harnessing the power of the cloud, having an open source core banking system to build on, they've been able to build out new features and scale their services to India and beyond. So right now they've reached almost 3 million customers, and they're processing a loan portfolio of close to $2.5 billion. And so I'm going to highlight both the impact of the cloud on their business as well as open source core banking. So first off, the data here comes from a recent case study that AWS did on their operations. So looking at AWS auto-scaling, they were able to reduce their IT costs by more than 40%. And then using Amazon Aurora, they've been able to support processing more than 3 million transactions daily. And then Amazon security features allowed them to meet compliance out of the box for their regional requirements. And then by having an open source core banking like Mifos to build upon, they were able to focus on building out differentiating features for their market. So not having to worry about core loan management capabilities, they've been able to focus on mobility solutions, data analytics, decision engineering, credit scoring, integration with credit bureaus, integration with payment systems, and integration with the Aadhaar national ID. And so the next factor I want to look at is mobile. And I want to look at both smartphone penetration as well as the growing adoption of mobile financial services worldwide. So according to the most recent State of the Industry report from GSMA in 2018, there are more than 866 million registered accounts across 90 countries for mobile money, and more than $1.3 billion in transactions are being processed each day. And in 2018 alone, more than 143 million new accounts were opened up. But opening up new accounts, isn't all that needs to happen. A driver of democratizing financial services really is enabling effective usage across these mobile money accounts. And so, luckily in 2018, there were still some positive signs of better usage in terms of digital transactions growing at twice the rate of other transactions. But we really believe open source banking can help to be a key enabler of innovation that enables the effective usage and not just opening accounts. And so for mobile money to actually become sustainable and achieve the impact and potential it can have, mobile money providers really need to evolve to become payment platforms to allow customers to connect with third parties delivering service on top of those platforms. And so right now, 80% of the revenue that comes from mobile money comes just from transaction fees, and they need to move towards offering adjacent services like credit, savings, and insurance, because this not only drives up more revenue per user, but it also increases the activity rate of each user. And open source core banking can be a key driver of upping that usage. And so for mobile, I'm not going to highlight a specific example like I did with the cloud, but some of the providers we looked at before, Musoni, and the providers I'm going to look at in the next couple slides, Minds and Novopay, both leverage mobile as their delivery channel. But what I wanted to focus on here is how our software as a whole can help the industry make the evolution towards becoming payment platforms and not just transaction engines. So we believe we can position Mifos and make it an end-to-end innovation engine that provides a set of digital rails to build apps on top of mobile money. And so currently right now, it's pretty costly and pretty ineffective and time-consuming to build these adjacencies on mobile wallet management systems. So with Mifos right now, management of a loan or savings product is built in since we are a core banking system. And we're working to evolve the functionality to be more of a generic mobile wallet management system. And then we're also integrating with over-the-top APIs like the GSMA Mobile Money API, the Hover SDK, as well as also providing an open banking layer. So the vision is to have an end-to-end architecture that includes a back-end to manage the accounts, the over-the-top APIs for the seamless flow of transactions via web or via USSD, an open banking layer to provide access to third parties, and then lastly, providing a reference open source mobile wallet, an open source mobile banking app, so you have that end-to-end stack to innovate upon. And so the next force I want to look at is national digital identity. So around the world, many countries are starting to look at adopting a biometric national digital ID, but by far the leaders in these efforts thus far is India. They've registered more than 1.2 billion individuals biometrically through their Aadhaar national ID system. And it really provides the connective glue for their innovative India stack, which provides a set of open APIs for presenceless, paperless, cashless, and consent layer that help to unlock services to go the last mile. And so we talked about Novopay, which I'm going to focus on the next slide last year, but they still represent a good example of how a fintech company can do a lot with an enabling rule like national ID on top of an open source core banking platform. So now I'm going to go to our story about Novopay. So Srikanth Nakamundi was actually the CTO and co-founder and designer of the Aadhaar system. He got together with Vinod Khosla of Khosla Ventures to start Khosla Labs in India. And one of the first startups incubated was Novopay. And so with Aadhaar, Srikanth knew that he could finally go that last mile in helping to authenticate people in rural villages, build trust, and include them financially. So with a simple mobile device, a fingerprint scanner attached to it, and the Aadhaar system, a retail outlet could be transformed into a bank branch. And so they started with just 15 outlets in Bangalore, India, and the concept of Novopay was born. And so they knew that to be a leader in an ever-growing and fast-paced mobile wallet market, that they had to scale and innovate fast. and that they could only do that if they had a flexible technology system. And that's why they turned to Mifos. So they knew that to enable the bold vision that they had outlined on this screen and the quick go-to-market strategy that was needed to be successful, that they couldn't just build a mobile wallet management from scratch or buy one or have a people-based strategy for growth. And so Mifos helped them to achieve both of these goals by having a proven API design architecture that was easy to build upon and also integrate with. And then it also allowed them to focus on differentiating innovation and to reduce the amount of staff that they needed to get to market. So they chose Mifos because it was available, proven, and tested out. And although it wasn't designed as a payment system, it provided the core capabilities that they needed in terms of defining products, managing a wallet or an account, and maintaining the accounting and general ledger balance. And it also neatly integrated into the microservice architecture that they had in place. And so by not having to either build or buy a core banking system from scratch, Novopay has been able to have a first mover advantage, and they've been able to focus on differentiating themselves in market through not only an improved customer experience, but also integrating with new delivery channels, having new products and services, and also having a reliable network of agents that they manage consistently. And so they've been able to process more than $1 billion in transaction volume through their network each year. And they've also been able to become the market leader in terms of services, but also the market leader in terms of operations by having near real-time visibility into the status of each transaction amongst their agents. And even this past year, they've been able to roll out services like Novopay to provide machine learning services as a platform for the region. And the next force we're going to look at is artificial intelligence. So a lot of the statistics and data that you'll see on the slides here come from a report last year that was launched by the World Economic Forum titled The New Physics of Financial Services and How Artificial Intelligence is Transforming the Financial Ecosystem. So from this report, you can see that investment in AI is growing across the financial services sector, but there is a lot of hype and a lot of fear missing out. And there are a wide number of ways in which artificial intelligence can help to change the business and impact of financial services. And these can be as small as incremental improvements, or they can be complete reinvention of businesses. So this ranges from using chatbots to help improve the customer support experience. You can use it to have better fraud and risk detection. You can use it to have better credit decisioning models and also to design bespoke products and services. But where we really believe it has the most impact is to help make the credit invisible visible. And one point I wanted to emphasize about artificial intelligence is how each of these independent democratizing forces are really pulled together and mutually reinforce each other. So with the widespread adoption of mobile phones, there's so much more data that can be gathered. And also as you have open banking and more access to data, this all enables that flow to flow into these models. And then secondly, you can use the unparalleled power of the computing in the cloud to analyze and process all this. So just wanted to highlight how each of these forces aren't independent of each other, and they really mutually reinforce each other. And then the brief case study I wanted to highlight that shows how open source core banking helped to amplify the impact of artificial intelligence is Minds. So Minds is a good case study of a company coming out of Silicon Valley that's looking to take a technology that they developed there and help it to solve a market problem like financial inclusion and financial access in West Africa. And so Minds, they developed and patented a proprietary in-memory data analytics engine while finishing up their PhDs at Stanford. And then a couple of the founders were from Nigeria, and they wanted to take that technology back there. And so they were looking at finding a reliable core banking system to help them get to market quickly. And so they used Mifos to provide that single source of truth for the customer and to maintain that loan balance. And so in real time, they're able to have a customer just text a simple number from a feature phone. And then based on the partnerships they have with the mobile networks, they're able to instantly credit risk that borrower on thousands of data points from their mobile network history, and then in real time provide them a decision regarding their loan. And so they were able to spend more time on establishing the partnerships needed to move forward in region, refine their data analytics engine because they didn't have to build or buy a core banking system from scratch. And so recently, last year, they closed a $13 million Series A round of investment, and now their focus is on providing a white label digital credit as a service solution throughout the globe. And so we're happy that they were able to fully leverage their capabilities of AI and build on top of a reliable, flexible, open source core banking platform. And then the next force that I want to look at is really the first time we're going to be looking at a Rayll. So this is going to be looking at open banking and PSD2. And this has the potential to perhaps be one of the most revolutionary forces we're looking at today. And so with this legislation, there's a movement towards both open APIs, but also actually mandated legislation for customer data to be opened up beyond just the banks. So open banking has its roots in the Payment Services Directive 2, which was enacted and took effect in Europe in 2018 with the goal of stimulating greater competition and new innovation from the banks who had become stagnant and too rooted in their status quo and weren't innovating for their customers. A good example of this is in the UK. Over 97% of the adult population there has a current account, but these current accounts, more than 70% of them are held by the 4 largest banks there, and most of those banks just rely on overdraft fees as their source of revenue and not delivering new services innovation. And so PSD2 is mandated for all financial service providers across Europe, and then open banking is a UK-specific standard, which is just for the 9 major banks there, but it goes much beyond in establishing an actual open banking standard with a standard API and a set of guidelines around security and customer experience of how this data needs to be opened up. And while right now the legislation is just focused on the UK, there are many movements beyond the UK to adopt their own open banking standards, and we're going to take a closer look at some of those. But really, when we look at the potential impact of open banking, it's going to enable customers to have control of their data. It's going to provide a level playing field in which fintechs and other companies can connect with the banks, and the banks are really going to have to either pivot to become platform service providers or innovate and develop new services. So really in the end, the customers are going to win out. And so while the early stages of impact are not taking account yet, there's great potential for what open banking can do. And then before we look more closely at open banking, I just want to distinguish between open banking capitalized versus open banking lowercase versus open source banking. So open banking is the legislation itself. Lowercase open banking is more the movement around open APIs and open access to data. And then we define open source core banking as actually providing an open source core banking system that's open from the ground up, having a set of APIs not just for data, but actually the actual banking functionality in the application. And so we believe that open source core banking can accelerate the impact of open banking because you're not just having that open data access layer, you're also providing that open API to build any type of application or solution. And so fintechs, now that they have access to this data, they don't have the barrier of having to purchase a costly or legacy-based core banking system, and they now have access to data and now have a technology solution in which to build innovative apps on top of. And likewise, banks can use the technology as well to help transition themselves to become platform providers, just as telcos need to do as well. And so the market I wanted to take a look at specifically around open banking is Mexico, because for our financial inclusion market, we're looking at Latin America, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia. So there's good momentum with open banking efforts in Africa, especially in Nigeria and Rwanda. But in Mexico, they're really taking a lead. They actually enacted the first fintech law in 2018, which aims to cover not only open banking, but cryptocurrency, crowdfunding, have a sandbox for regulations. And you can see all the benefits they're looking to achieve there. And in Mexico, the situation is actually the inverse of the UK. So more than 60% of the population don't have a formal bank account in Mexico, but they believe by opening up access to this data, there'll be more innovation and new services can flow down to all sectors of the market, especially those who are financially excluded right now. And so one of our partners in Mexico, Fintecheando, is working closely with a number of the government institutions to help roll out Mifos as a core banking system and adopt these new open banking APIs that are being implemented. And so where I wanted to focus on here is just the power that you have in providing an open banking layer to institutions that are serving the base of the pyramid. So you might think that it's not, that valuable to open up access to data for these customers, but it's actually even more valuable because so many of these customers are really the credit invisible, or they have no formal credit profile. And by being able to provide an open banking API layer that an informal institution like a microfinance institution or a SACCO can roll out, you're able to provide access to formal financial services to this widespread market that previously has been untouched. The last democratizing force I wanted to look at today is more around the blockchain and distributed ledger. So I know that we could spend probably a whole session on talking about blockchain for good, but there is a lot of other content, and I think a whole blockchain track here. So I just wanted to highlight some specific use cases of initiatives that we're working with. But some of the major players in blockchain for financial services are some of the names you see listed here. And really the end goal is to utilize the blockchain and distributed ledgers to help reduce the costs, the time and friction of money transfers, primarily ones that are flowing across borders. But the initiative I wanted to highlight today is an open source project launched by the Gates Foundation called Mojaloop, and that leverages Ripple's interledger protocol to provide an internet of payments to route transactions across different ledger systems and enable interoperability of payments such that you could initiate a payment from a cryptocurrency to a SWIFT network or to a mobile money network and vice versa. But Mojaloop is the reference open source implementation for a set of design principles called the Level 1 project that the Gates Foundation developed to design how a modern payment system should work to enable inclusive digital financial economies. So this means having a push-based payment system, having them be irrevocable, having them happen near in real time, having them happen at low to no cost. And then so Mojaloop consists of a set of centralized components which include an account lookup service as well as a central directory. So you could utilize just a mobile phone number in the GSMA Pathfinder database to identify an individual based on their phone number. Then there's also central services for transfers, settlements, quoting, etc. And then also this interledger protocol for the routing of payments. And so their goal is to support high volume, low value payments, but have it happen as quickly as a real-time gross settlement payment system, and then support a number of these use cases you see on the slide here, including peer-to-peer transfers, merchant-based proximity payments through QR codes, bulk payments, etc. And so there's a lot of traction growing across the Mojaloop community and project right now. They're actually going to be spinning out a separate independent entity to guide the community. And then the first implementation of Mojaloop has gone live in the Ivory Coast with Mowali, which is a mobile wallet interoperability initiative between MTN and Orange. And then the Bank of Tanzania is actually adopting Mifos or Mojaloop as the basis of its national payment switch called TIPS, or the Tanzania Instant Payment System. And then I just wanted to lastly emphasize what we're working on with Mojaloop. So we're combining Mifos and Mojaloop to provide an end-to-end open source architecture for digital financial services. So the two open source projects are highly complementary. Mifos provides that open source account management layer, and then Mojaloop provides that interoperable set of digital rails that leverages mobile money or other financial systems. And collectively, you can provide innovative digital rails with Mifos providing that innovation engine. And then this last slide here just shows the architecture of what we're building out. So we have the Mojaloop hub over there, and then we're providing a payment hub middleware to connect Mifos and Mojaloop. And then we're also providing an open banking API layer such that third parties could come and access data from the system or initiate transactions via the Mojaloop system. But why I really wanted to close on this slide in Mifos and Mojaloop, because I think it's a good example of how all of these democratizing forces can be brought together in a single solution that's accelerated by open source core banking. So both Mifos and Mojaloop are cloud native and microservices based, and they harness the power of the cloud as their operating system. Mojaloop leverages the interledger protocol to create this Internet of Payments, routing funds across any ledger-based system. And then you now have a set of digital rails providing interoperability across mobile money. And then machine learning and AI can be used to refine and create powerful models to detect risks across the payment system. And then a national digital identity can be a key part of that global identifier in the system. And then lastly, we're providing an open banking API so any third party can access data or initiate transactions on top of it. And then my final slide here before we take some questions is just looking at a number of summaries and takeaways for different stakeholders across these financial services landscapes. So first off, around government and regulators, they need to work on enabling rule frameworks so they can't stifle innovation before it happens. Initiatives like M-Pesa really got off the ground because there was an enabling regulator in place that allowed it to get off the ground before it got shot down. And then these institutions also need to continue educating themselves on open source in the cloud and not be reticent about them. And then for fintechs and financial institutions actually adopting these softwares, they need to not just consume open source, but also contribute to it. That's a barrier we're trying to overcome, where we've had a lot of these members of our ecosystem consume our open source and build on top of it, but they don't contribute back, and we can't enable that virtuous cycle that's critical to the health of an open source project. And then these companies also need to focus really on innovation where it matters the most. So not trying to build a core banking system from scratch, but building out new apps, new accounts and services on those digital rails that we focused upon. And then for the banks and telcos, they need to take these platform-based approaches, and that open source banking can really help to enable that for them. And that they also shouldn't be afraid to experiment and innovate. A lot of the members of our ecosystem have used Mifos as a flexible platform to fail rapidly and allow them to test out new innovations. And then lastly, for banking and technology leaders, we want them to invest in shared assets for the industry as a whole, like Mifos and Mojaloop. So we're actually trying to start an association within Mifos to bring together large banks or large cloud providers to make small investments into the ongoing sustainability of projects like Mifos. And then for you as individuals, these are some of the ways that you can take action today. So we need you to help evangelize our software and platforms. There's many ways to volunteer, be it technical or non-technical. You can donate and become a member of our open source fintech force. We're also seeking board members and advisors. And then lastly, if you have a fintech company or you're looking to build a fintech solution, we want you to come and innovate and build on the platform. And we'll be at our booth tomorrow in the Nonprofit Expo Hall. And then here's my contact information. So I think there might be a couple minutes for questions, but thank you.